Welcome back to Paul's Tech News. January is halfway over, and I still can't tell what kind of a year 2022 is going to be. I mean, we still have horrible things from prior years carrying over, as reflected in this week's news stories. Nvidia taunting us with ever more expensive and unattainable GPUs. CES attendees discovering that the whole stays in Vegas thing does not apply to COVID. And GTA 6, which could provide us all with a blessed escape from this cruel reality, is still likely 2 years off, if we're lucky. On the plus side, though, there is hope for an easing of the shortages later in the year. New chip fabs seem to be popping up everywhere, and Razer got called out on the BS marketing they've been doing for their RGB face mask. And perhaps most importantly, you're here, right now, watching this show, presumably because there's no possible better way you could be spending your time. But I think as a result, you're going to end up smarter, and a bunch of other good things are going to happen too, and I also might occasionally make a joke. Not right now, though.
Excellent!
We begin this week with Nvidia, who tried to pull a fast one on us all with Tuesday's launch of the RTX 3080 12GB, a slightly upgraded RTX 3080 with 2 more gigs of VRAM, a handful of extra CUDA cores, and a bit more memory bandwidth. It also bumps the power up to 350 watts, but there were precious few media reviews at launch. Those who did discuss it seemed a bit miffed too, and the reasons why were best articulated by Angry Steve over at Hardware Unboxed. You see, it all goes back to the September 2020 launch of the original RTX 3080, which had an MSRP of $700, which was fantastic. It was well received by the press, and it was clear that Nvidia was comfortable selling the GA102 GPU-based card for that much money. Shortly thereafter, though, GPU mining profitability spiked, card supply dried up, and we've seen a shortage situation ever since, with 10GB 3080s regularly selling for $2,000 or more. Nvidia probably greatly regrets that $700 list price, though, as it's frequently been used as a metric to compare GPU value before and after the outsized influence of cryptocurrency mining. And Nvidia has been seeking ways to leverage the shortage situation and sell their GA102 GPUs for more money ever since. It started with the RTX 3080 Ti, which listed for $1,200, even though it was only about 11% faster. And while it's certainly legitimate to argue that they're a business doing what businesses do and selling their product for what the market will bear, they've taken things a step further with the RTX 3080 12GB. The top 2 grievances are that there's no stated MSRP for the new version, and that Nvidia withheld pre-launch drivers from the few reviewers who did have cards, in an apparent attempt to soften the launch day criticism, which they would have preferred went by with as little fanfare as possible, so the replacement RTX 3080, which we can now see is listing on EVGA's store for $1,250 to $1,300, could sell out immediately to scalpers with minimal finger pointing as to who is now profiting most from the shortage. You'd have to assume that even an undisclosed official MSRP would be less than the $1,200 that the 3080 Ti lists for, but since 12GB 3080s are already selling for more than that, they've even been hemmed in by that GPU's MSRP, which launched last June. So we get it. There's no Founders Edition, no official MSRP, and likely very few, if any, GA102 dies that Samsung's fabs produce will now go into 10GB 3080s. They'll go into 12GB ones that cost a lot more. Reviews are now in, and big surprise, Nvidia managed to ration the card's resources just enough to slot performance in beneath the 3080 Ti and above the OG 3080, even though it was just a 10% gap between those two cards already, which is another reason why this card was not needed by anyone except Nvidia, who wanted to correct their original pricing mistake. Angry Steve was right to be angry. But what can any of us actually do about it? The frustrating answer is not much. We could gloat over rumors that surfaced Friday about troubles with the upcoming 3090 Ti, which was supposedly going to launch on the 27th, but has now had its embargo canceled, while AIB partners were ordered to halt production, as reported by TweetTown and confirmed by videocards.com. Issues with the BIOS and hardware, it said. Gloating probably won't do us much good though, but don't buy into the argument that Nvidia should be doing this because the money would have just gone to scalpers anyway. That helps anchor these prices so they remain high even after the shortage subsides. I think the thing we really need though is patience and hope for another market shift like what happened after the last GPU bubble popped in 2018. Countless used GPUs flooding the market for well below MSRP, which I will happily recommend to new builders over whatever the latest newly launched card is if that happens again in the near future. Speaking of hopium-based fantasy scenarios, Nvidia also says that GPU shortages will ease in the second half of 2022? Perhaps I judged them too harshly. As reported by Seeking Alpha, Colette Kress, Chief Financial Officer of Nvidia, spoke at the 24th Annual Needham Growth Conference and said, "Throughout all of calendar 2021, we have seen strong demand for GeForce, and it continues to remain stronger than our overall supply. We feel better about our supply situation as we move into the second half of the calendar year 2022. That would seem to indicate that Team Green has plans to ramp up output for the GeForce RTX 40 series, codenamed Ada Lovelace, which is expected to be manufactured on TSMC's N5 node, which already has a good 3-year track record." And one more bit of Nvidia news, more specifically an update on the Nvidia-based EVGA GPUs that were stolen en route from San Francisco to Southern California back in October. They have been found and are now safely being sold in Vietnam by the Quang Nguyen PC store, Ho Chi Minh City branch, at least according to a Facebook post from a store customer whose 3080 Ti couldn't be registered with EVGA since it was on the ban list from last year's robbery. It was at least discounted though and sold with a limited 1-month warranty, so we'll see if EVGA's APAC team follows up with the store and if there's any more to this story. And hey, at least they didn't all just end up in a mining farm. Let's quickly dip into some AMD news next. After the Zen 4 CES announcements, it was inevitable that the chips would start to appear in the wild. But this was pretty quick. 2 engineering sample CPUs popped up in the public database of the Milky Way at Home project early this week, which appear to be Zen 4-based early Ryzen 7000 series samples. One was an 8-core and one was 16-core, and they have 1024 kilobytes of L2 cache per core, double what Zen 3-based Ryzen 5000X CPUs currently ship with. Because the CPUs were paired with an RTX 2080, TechSpot assumes the entries came from an OEM rather than AMD themselves, and there's not much info beyond that. Expect more leaks like this as 2022 progresses though, since Zen 4 Ryzen 7000 CPUs are expected in the second half of the year, along with the new socket LGA 1718 AM5 platform. And let's round out the main part of the show with a handful of stories about Intel, starting with a leak about their upcoming Raptor Lake CPUs, the follow-up to Alder Lake expected later this year. At CES, Intel showed an early sample of Raptor Lake running Windows, and so it makes sense that the Intel boot log already has entries for the new CPUs. Specs listed show a 24-core, 32-thread CPU, which is presumed to be an i9-13900K with 16 efficiency cores and 8 performance cores, doubling the E-core count versus the 12900K. This aligns with a leak from early December that showed the same configuration, although it was an early sample just running at 1.8 GHz, which is a bit slow for an Intel CPU. It does look like they're doubling down on those E-cores though, which you might think is a Raptor Lake mistake. But while you were staring at those P-cores, they just stared right back. And that's when the attack comes. Not from the front, but from the sides. And the other Raptor E-cores that you didn't even know were there. Clever girl. Joe, can we just make a note that I was the first to make a clever girl joke about Raptor Lake, and anyone who does it after now is just copying me? Thanks. Der Bauer, famed PC overclocker, tech YouTuber, and answer to the question, where Bauer got his hands on what appears to be an unreleased 56-core Intel Xeon processor, an engineering sample from the Sapphire Rapids line that's not expected until later in 2022. He picked it up on eBay and proceeded to do what he does best, delidding the socket 4677 CPU to reveal what was beneath the heat spreader, which was simply labeled Xeon vPro XCC QWP3. The answer was 4 compute dies, which were connected via Intel's Embedded Multi-Die Interconnect Bridge, or EMIB technology, which totally doesn't use glue like AMD's Infinity Fabric probably does. Roman would have loved to fire up the CPU rather than destroying it to see its innards, but apparently the CPUs are much easier to come by right now than the LGA 4677 motherboards, which you kind of need in order to run the CPU. Intel had some internal changes going on this week as well, with client computing group lead Gregory G.B. Bryant announcing that he would be leaving the company for another opportunity, hot on the heels of his CES 2022 keynote presentation. I will say this though, if you're going to leave a company, the beginning of the year is the classy time to do so, after handling the mess that usually accompanies the holiday season and Q4. Intel's new CCG head and woman who really doesn't have time for your shit today, Michelle Johnston Holthouse, has not indicated if she will also use an amicable acronym in place of her given name, as MJH doesn't really roll off the tongue quite the same way, but she has a long and proven track record at Intel, joining Team Blue 25 years ago in 1996. She will also be joined by a new social media head as well, Leslie Douglas, as reported by Dr. Ian Cuttress, and Leslie has already proved her social media acumen by including both emojis and a hashtag in her announcement post. Hopefully she can convince CEO Pat Gelsinger to do a TikTok dance next and really win over those youth demographics. DigiTimes reported Thursday that TSMC has updated their 3nm fab plans, promising Intel additional manufacturing capacity by repurposing an R&D facility in northern Taiwan to be another N3 fab just for Intel. This will allow them to separate Intel's orders from Apple's, keeping information regarding products from each manufacturer secure from the other. This is both an indication of Intel's expanding plans for chip production in coming years, as well as their willingness to enter a long-term partnership with TSMC, who is technically a rival in terms of chip production. TSMC's cutting-edge fabs have proven very successful though, which is why they are outperforming their growth targets and planning further expansion in 2022. Intel also has expansion plans though, and we are apparently on the cusp of an official announcement that should make Ohio residents happy. The location has been chosen for a $20 billion facility that will employ 3,000 people in the greater Columbus area. Rumors have been swirling about this one for a while, and most recently, the city of New Albany annexed 3,190 acres from neighboring Jersey Township to expand the New Albany International Business Park, where Google, Amazon, and Facebook have data centers. Seems like a spot where an Intel factory could fit right in. Plus, it's in Licking County, which is way better than Sucking County, and semiconductor wafers are supposed to be very flat, just like Ohio, so this all makes a lot of sense to me. What doesn't make sense is tech briefs. How can they be so packed with information and fun while also being so brief? We'll probably never know. PCI-SIG, the governing body for PCI Express, is packing in more data than ever with their first release of the PCI Express 6.0 standard. 64 gigatransfers per second per lane for a maximum theoretical bandwidth of 256 gigabytes per second in a full by 16 slot. 256 gigabytes per second. That's like this whole SSD, or roughly 4% of your hidden porn collection, going from here to there in 1 second. This will mostly help data centers and stuff, but it just really blows the mind. I can't even think that fast. Razer had to think fast when they got called out by Naomi Wu just after CES, where Razer's new Zephyr Pro RGB face mask won some awards and attention. Wu, aka Real Sexy Cyborg on Twitter, pointed out that the mask is not N95 rated. Only the filters appear to meet the particulate standards, and since N95 is an official certification granted by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, Razer was misleading people with the term N95 grade. After complaints gained traction, Razer removed all references to N95 grade filter from their marketing materials and emailed buyers to let them know that the Zephyr is not a certified N95 mask. Thanks to Naomi for calling this out, and she also suggested showing this video where she originally tried out the Razer Zephyr back in November and used her engineering skills to build a much more functional version. This video is linked in the video's description. Samsung mysteriously no-showed to their own event, an Exynos 2200 launch announcement that they teased at the end of December, which was expected to take place on Tuesday. The day came and went with nothing from Samsung, which is just a bit odd for a manufacturer of their size. A day later, though, Samsung decided to stop ghosting the world and told Business Korea, "We are planning to unveil the new application processor at the time of launching a new Samsung smartphone," which is probably the Galaxy S22, which will probably get announced at the Samsung Galaxy Unpacked 2022 event, which will probably be in early February. Or maybe there's some trouble causing a delay with Samsung's new flagship. That's completely unsubstantiated information, but maybe. Also unrelated, about 70 CES 2022 attendees from South Korea brought COVID-19 home from the show and had to be quarantined. That includes executives and staff from major South Korean companies, 20 reportedly from Samsung, and I'm sure none of them were the ones who were supposed to give that Exynos 2200 announcement. I didn't even say that out loud, so I'm not sure why you're thinking it. You should stop it. Stop that now. Speaking of stopping things, police are theoretically supposed to stop crime, but not in this hilarious story about cops who would rather hunt Pokémon than pursue criminals while on the beat. The goofy officers were recorded in 2017 hunting an errant Snorlax in Pokémon Go when one of those pesky robbery in progress calls came through. "Ah, screw it," they said, and continued to drive their police cruiser around collecting digital cartoon characters. Just adorable. Speaking of video games and cops, GTA 6 will probably feature both of those things if it ever launches, and while some have given up hope on the series due to recent missteps made by Rockstar, there is now hope that the game might actually launch in the next 2 years, if financial estimates made by parent company Take-Two are any indication. They're expecting strong growth through 2024, optimistically enough that analysts say only a GTA release could make them so confident in their money-making abilities in that timeframe. And the good news is they're talking about fiscal years, meaning that if true, the actual launch could be anywhere from the beginning of April 2023 to the end of March 2024. April 2023 is only about 15 months away. All they need to do now is promise a PC launch at the same time as the consoles, and it might be enough to make us forget how dirty they did us all with the whole GTA, the trilogy, the definitive edition remastered thing. Some wounds will never fully heal though. So there you have it guys, tech news for the week, and I hope you all are having a great start to 2022 so far. Your feedback is always welcome, so please feel free to leave me a comment down below. While you're down there, all the articles I talked about today are linked in the description if you're interested in further reading. You can also click the like button. If you enjoyed this video, check out my store at paulshardware.net for a selection of excellent merchandise options, t-shirts, hoodies, beer sets, and more, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more videos like this one in the future. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you next week.